Some kids are born big. Others are born burning. Ethan Parker was the second kind, the kind that nobody noticed until it was too late. At 14, he looked like the world had forgotten to finish building him. Sandy hair that never quite lay flat. Freckles that spattered across his nose like tiny badges of stubbornness. Shoulders narrow as a sapling's trunk. Hands that seemed made more for sketching dreams than throwing punches. And yet, even as he sat there, beaten, humiliated, small, there was a defiance about him, a quiet ember that hadn't yet been snuffed out. The gym smelled of rubber, dust, and the sour tang of teenage sweat. Above, the fluorescent lights flickered and buzzed like 1,000 trapped insects. Around the battered lunch table, a circle of kids shouted and jeered, their voices blending into a messy roar. At the center of it, Chad Reynolds stood grinning, all muscle and swagger, towering over Ethan like a mountain laughing at an ant. Ethan's right arm lay pinned against the table, throbbing with the dull, embarrassing ache of defeat. The match was over before it had even begun. "That's it," Chad crowed, holding Ethan's hand against the table a second longer, just to twist the humiliation deeper. "Thought you had some fight, Parker." Laughter exploded around them. Somewhere in the back, someone started chanting, "Twig boy, twig boy." The others picked it up fast, like a pack smelling blood. Mr. Harris, the gym teacher, a man too tired for confrontation, half-heartedly waved the crowd off. All right, give him some space," he muttered, not really meaning it. But Ethan didn't cry. He didn't shout. He didn't shove. He didn't do anything at all. He stood slowly, his body stiff with something heavier than shame. And as he turned away, the sleeve of his hoodie slipped up just enough to reveal it, a faded red bandana wrapped twice around his wrist. Not for style, not for show, for memory, for promise. Outside, Millersville buzzed with a different kind of energy. The fair was coming. Every June, this sleepy speck of a town exploded into color and noise. Carnival rides, food trucks, games that smelled like sawdust and pipe dreams. Kids practiced pie eating at home. Families painted signs. Local bands dusted off their guitars. It was a celebration of summer, of survival, of belonging. And this year, rumor had it, there would be a guest. Not just any guest, a real guest, a legend. The posters went up overnight. They didn't say a name, only a silhouette. A man with arms like coiled ropes, a bandana tied tight across his forehead. Could it be? Could it possibly be? Therefore, while most kids buzzed about rides and cotton candy, Ethan plotted something different. He was going to the fair. He was going to stand there right in front of everyone, including Chad. And he wasn't going to hide. Not anymore. If the universe had sent him a message, maybe, just maybe, it wasn't to give up. Maybe it was to fight. Even if his arms shook. Even if his voice cracked. Even if he stood alone. The day of the fair broke hot and blue. Sunlight hammered the asphalt into waves of shimmering air. The town square transformed into a kaleidoscope. Booths selling everything from homemade jam to bootleg DVDs. The smell of barbecue thick enough to chew. Ethan pulled his hoodie tighter, though the heat stabbed at his skin. The red bandana stayed tucked beneath the sleeve, his secret armor. He moved through the fairgrounds like a ghost, unnoticed, invisible. Chad was already there, of course, holding court by the arm wrestling booth, flexing, laughing. Taking on challengers one after another, grinning each time he slammed another hand down onto the sticky wooden table. The crowd loved it. They loved him. Ethan kept his distance. He drifted past the dunk tank, the pie stands, the booth where Mrs. Abernathy sold homemade candles that smelled like old churches and burned regrets. He found a spot by the fence line, half in shadow, where he could watch without being seen. Time dragged. The sun dipped lower. The lights strung across the fairgrounds began to flicker on, casting the field in a warm, golden haze. The announcer's voice crackled over the PA system. "Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it's almost time. Our surprise guest will be arriving any minute." The crowd surged toward the main stage, a sea of sunburned faces and waving hands. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. He tugged at his sleeve, feeling the soft, worn fabric of the bandana. A tether to something braver than he felt right now. Engines rumbled. A sleek black SUV rolled into view, scattering fairgoers like startled geese. It pulled up alongside the stage, and for a moment, everything seemed to stop. The rides, the music, even the breeze. The door opened. Out stepped a man who carried 30 years of battles, on screen and off, in the stoop of his shoulders and the craggy lines of his face. He wore a simple black t-shirt, jeans faded by real life, not designer wash. A chain around his neck caught the stage lights just so. He didn't need an introduction. The whole town knew. Sylvester Stallone, here, in Millersville, at their fair. The crowd erupted. Kids screamed, parents cheered, grandparents clutched their chests in awe. But Stallone didn't head straight for the stage. He walked, slowly, deliberately, across the packed fairgrounds. And he was heading toward the arm wrestling booth, toward Chad, toward the table where humiliation had been a sport, toward Ethan's battlefield. Therefore, Ethan did something he hadn't planned. He stepped out from the shadows. He moved closer, closer, until he stood just on the edge of the booth, close enough to smell the warm, sharp bite of popcorn oil and the sour adrenaline rolling off the other kids. Chad saw him. Their eyes locked. Chad smirked, the same smirk he'd worn in the gym, the same one that had branded itself onto Ethan's memory. Only this time, Ethan didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He stood there, the red bandana now fully visible on his wrist, catching the light like a flare. Stallone's gaze swept the crowd. It passed over Chad, over the table, over the flashing cameras, and then, impossibly, it landed on Ethan. He paused. He looked again. A half smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, crinkling the scarred skin around his eyes. Then he nodded. A small, almost imperceptible nod. Not of pity, not of dismissal, of recognition. Ethan's lungs burned. He couldn't move. Could barely breathe. But inside something cracked open. Not like a breaking bone, like a door. A door that had been bolted shut for so long he'd forgotten there was even a world on the other side. And now, standing in the dusty light of a fading summer day, facing the boy who had crushed him, facing the town that had laughed, standing under the gaze of the man who had taught him, through grainy VHS tapes and whispered bedtime stories, what it meant to get up when you had no reason left to. Ethan Parker smiled, a real smile. For the first time in what felt like forever, the announcer's voice blared again, sharp and triumphant. Who's ready for a real challenge? The crowd roared. Stallone tilted his head, a silent invitation, and Ethan took a step forward. The thing about standing up is, you're instantly visible. Ethan felt it the second he stepped forward. Eyes peeled away from Chad and snapped toward him, curious and mocking. Who did he think he was? Some scrawny kid with a second-hand hoodie and a too-tight smile, daring to move closer to the booth that had crushed him hours before. The fairground air felt heavier around him, thick with dust, popcorn oil, and expectation. Chad caught the movement first. He turned, lazy and confident, the way predators turned when they knew they didn't need to hurry. A sneer spread slowly across his face. "Well, look who crawled out of the locker room," Chad said loudly, making sure the surrounding kids heard him. A ripple of laughter passed through the crowd. Ethan said nothing. He just kept walking. Every step was a war. Every inch forward was a victory. Sylvester Stallone stood by the booth, arms folded, eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. But Ethan felt it. The weight of that gaze. Not judgmental, not pitying, measuring. Stallone wasn't there for sideshows. He wasn't there for bullies. He was there for something else. Maybe, Ethan dared to hope, he was there for him. The announcer's voice cracked over the speakers. "Millersville, you ready for something special? Our guest today isn't just a movie star. He's a fighter, a survivor, a reminder that no matter how hard you get knocked down, you get back up. The crowd roared. Stallone stepped forward, the mic in his hand looking tiny compared to his thick, weathered fingers. He spoke in that unmistakable gravelly tone, the one Ethan had memorized from battered VHS tapes. "You know," Stallone began, pausing as the crowd leaned in, "when I was a kid, nobody thought I'd make it. I wasn't big. I wasn't strong. But I learned something. It ain't about the size of the body. It's about the size of the heart." A few cheers erupted. Stallone smiled faintly. Then he pointed, directly at Ethan. "But you," he said, voice cutting clean through the air. "You already know that, don't you, kid?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ethan froze. His cheeks flushed so hot he thought they might burn right off. All eyes were on him. But instead of shrinking back, he stepped forward again. His sneakers scuffed the dusty ground. His hands trembled at his sides. He walked up to the table, the same table where humiliation still hung in the air like smoke. Chad laughed, loud, mocking, almost desperate. "You gonna cry again, Parker? Right here in front of Rambo?" The crowd chuckled nervously. Stallone's expression didn't change. If anything, his gaze hardened slightly. He turned to the booth operator, a burly man with a sunburned neck and arms like fence posts. "Set the table," Stallone said simply. Therefore they did. 2 chairs, 1 battered, sweat-stained tabletop, 1 match. Not Chad versus Ethan, not yet. It would be Stallone, not competing, but demonstrating, teaching. "You don't beat the world with strength," Stallone said, setting his elbow gently on the table. "You beat it with will." He nodded at Ethan. "Show me yours." For a second, Ethan hesitated. Not because he doubted the words, but because he doubted himself. Could he? Was he worthy of this moment? A voice deep inside, the same one that had whispered through all the lonely nights, all the broken dreams, answered for him. Yes. Ethan sat down opposite Stallone. He placed his elbow on the table. Their hands met. Stallone didn't crush him. He didn't even squeeze. He just held Ethan's hand firmly, grounding him, connecting him to something bigger than himself. "Ready?" Stallone asked, voice low. Ethan nodded. They pushed. Slow. Controlled. Not a battle of muscles, a battle of spirits. Ethan fought. Not Stallone. His own fear, his own doubt, his own belief that he wasn't enough. Every muscle in his thin arm screamed. His hand shook, his vision blurred. But he didn't quit. He gritted his teeth. He dug deeper. And slowly, painfully, the pressure on his hand eased. Not because he won, because Stallone eased it, because Stallone smiled, a real smile, and raised Ethan's hand high in the air. "He's got it," Stallone said into the microphone. "He's got the stuff you can't teach." The crowd exploded. For Ethan, the sound was distant, like the roar of the ocean in a seashell. Inside, something cracked open wider, something blinding, something beautiful. Chad scowled, arms crossed, jaw working furiously. He hated it. He hated that the attention had shifted. He hated that this scrawny nobody, this twig boy, was standing in a spotlight he had always believed belonged to him. And most of all, he hated the way Stallone looked at Ethan, like he mattered, like he belonged. After the demonstration, the fair returned to its chaotic rhythm. Games, laughter, lights spinning in dizzying circles. But the air around Ethan had changed. People nodded at him as they passed. A few clapped him on the back. A little kid, no older than 7, tugged at his sleeve and whispered, "You're brave." Ethan blinked, stunned, and managed a shaky smile. Therefore, Chad made his move. Not in front of the cameras, not in front of the adults. Later, when the sun dipped below the horizon and the fair became a flickering world of shadows and noise, Chad cornered Ethan near the edge of the parking lot between 2 battered pickup trucks. No witnesses, no heroes, Just them. Think you're hot stuff now, huh? Chad snarled. Ethan said nothing. His hands were fists at his sides. You embarrassed me in front of the whole town, Chad hissed, stepping closer. The smell of sweat and anger rolled off him in waves. You're gonna pay for that! For a moment, Ethan's old instincts kicked in. Duck, run, disappear. But something stopped him. Not Stallone's presence, not the crowd's cheers. Something deeper, the fire. The fire that had flickered and sputtered but never died. The fire that said, you don't have to win, you just have to stand. So Ethan stood. Chad shoved him, hard. Ethan stumbled back against a truck bumper, pain shooting up his spine. Still, he didn't fall. Chad shoved him again. Still, Ethan didn't move. He just stared, not with hatred, not with fear, with something worse, pity. You're not worth it, Ethan said quietly. Not to Chad, to himself. Because he realized, in that moment, that Chad wasn't the mountain. He wasn't the world. He was just a scared, angry boy who didn't know who he was without someone weaker to stomp on. Chad froze, confused, angry, lost. He shoved Ethan one last time, a weak, meaningless push, then turned and stalked away into the night. Ethan leaned back against the truck, heart pounding, chest heaving. He had survived. No, he had won. Not by fighting, by refusing, by standing. As he walked back toward the fairgrounds, the lights twinkling ahead like a constellation built just for him, a voice called out, "Hey, Parker!" Ethan turned. Stallone stood by the edge of the main stage, arms crossed, smile slow and sure. You coming or what? Ethan grinned, and he ran. The higher you climb, the lonelier the air becomes. Ethan didn't expect that. He had thought, foolishly maybe, that winning respect was the end of the story. That once you stood up, once you proved you had fire inside you, everything else would fall into place. But standing out, it wasn't the finish line. It was just a new battlefield. The next morning, Millersville buzzed with stories. Ethan Parker arm wrestled Stallone. Kid held his own against Rambo. Did you hear? Stallone said he's got the heart of a fighter. At first, the attention felt like sunlight after a long winter. Warm, healing. Neighbors waved when they passed his house. Kids at school nodded instead of laughing. For the first time, Ethan moved through the world not as a shadow, but as a person who mattered. But the cracks appeared fast. By Monday, whispers turned sharper. Sure, Stallone let him win. That wasn't real strength. He's just a charity case. Chad's friends, the ones who had roared with laughter at Ethan's humiliation just days before, led the charge. At lunch, they sat 3 tables away, snickering behind cupped hands. At gym, they made sure Ethan was the last picked for dodgeball again, throwing the ball extra hard whenever he caught it. Even some of the adults, parents who had clapped so proudly, began muttering behind coffee cups. It's cute and all, but let's not pretend the kid's a hero. Millersville's got real athletes, real fighters. Ethan tried to ignore it. Tried to hold on to the memory of Stallone's nod. Tried to keep the fire burning. Therefore, he pushed harder. He ran laps after school. He did push-ups until his arms shook. He practiced arm wrestling against the kitchen table, the doorknob, anything he could brace against. Each day, he tied the red bandana tighter around his wrist. Each night, he whispered to the empty room, "You're not done yet." One evening, after another grueling workout in the backyard, Stallone showed up. Not with cameras, not with a crowd. Just him, leaning against the battered picket fence, arms folded, watching. "Good form," he said casually. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. He stumbled to his feet, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I gotta get better," Ethan panted. "I gotta prove it wasn't just luck." Stallone tilted his head. "You think you got something to prove to them?" he asked, jerking his chin toward the town. Ethan hesitated. I guess." Stallone pushed off the fence, walking closer. "Nah, kid. Wrong fight. He pointed to Ethan's chest. "You gotta prove it to you." Ethan swallowed hard. "But they all think I'm nothing." Stallone smiled, a slow, sad smile that carved deeper lines into his weathered face. "They always will. Some of them, anyway. Doesn't change what you are." He paused. "Only thing that changes is whether you believe them." The words hit harder than any shove Chad had ever given. Ethan stared down at the ground, struggling to breathe past the knot in his throat. But somewhere deep inside, something clicked. Not a roar, not a cheer. A quiet, steady drumbeat. "I know who I am. I know what I'm made of." Therefore, when the town announced a last-minute event for the final night of the fair, an open arm wrestling tournament for all ages, winner gets $500 and a trophy bigger than a kitchen sink, Ethan didn't hesitate. He signed up. No cameras, no special treatment. Just him, against whoever showed up, win or lose. Word spread fast. By the time the tournament rolled around, half of Millersville crowded the fairgrounds. Kids on bikes, moms with folding chairs. Retired farmers with weathered faces and deep, skeptical frowns. Everyone wanted to see if Ethan Parker was a real fighter, or just a lucky kid who got his moment and milked it for all it was worth. Chad signed up too. Of course he did. He strutted across the field like a conquering hero, slapping hands, flexing, making sure everyone saw him. Ethan watched from a distance, heart hammering. He wasn't afraid of Chad anymore. Not exactly. But the memory of that first crushing defeat still lived somewhere inside his muscles, coiled and ready to betray him. The tournament began. The early rounds were brutal. A lumberjack-looking man crushed his first opponent in seconds. A farm girl, no older than 16, slammed down 3 challengers in a row with terrifying ease. Chad demolished his first match, barely breaking a sweat. When Ethan's name was called, a ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd, some cheering, some laughing. His first opponent was a kid from the next town over. Big, cocky. Their hands met. The whistle blew. Ethan fought. He didn't win by power, he won by refusal. Every time the kid tried to twist his wrist, Ethan adjusted. Every time the kid leaned too hard, Ethan resisted. But not with anger, with focus. With that same quiet, stubborn fire that had kept him moving when the world wanted him crushed. In the end, Ethan's opponent gassed out, and Ethan pressed his hand down, slow and steady, until the referee slapped the table and declared him the winner. The crowd erupted. Therefore, Ethan advanced, one match, then another. Each victory built something inside him. Not arrogance, not pride. Belief. Not belief that he would always win. Belief that he could try. Then came the final bracket. Ethan versus Chad. Of course. The fairground lights blazed down, casting long shadows over the battered table. The crowd surged closer, a living wall of noise and expectation. Mr. Harris, drafted last minute as the referee, looked nervous as he called them forward. Chad swaggered to the table, cracking his knuckles theatrically. Ethan approached more slowly, the red bandana tied tight around his wrist. They locked eyes. No words, just history. "Let's go, Twig," Chad sneered, loud enough for the front row to hear. Some laughed, some didn't. Ethan set his elbow down. Chad matched it, their hands gripped. The world narrowed to a point. The whistle blew. Chad attacked immediately, jerking Ethan's arms sideways with brutal force. Ethan grunted, muscles screaming. The table shook under the pressure. Chad grinned, sure of his victory. But Ethan didn't fold. He found an anchor somewhere inside himself. A memory, a promise, a stubborn refusal to be less than he was. Therefore, the match dragged on. 10 seconds. 20. A minute. Sweat dripped down Ethan's temples. His wrist trembled, his teeth clenched. Chad growled, leaning harder. But for every ounce Chad pushed, Ethan pushed back, not because he was stronger, because he refused. The crowd roared, half in disbelief, half in awe. Stallone stood at the back, arms folded, watching. Silent. Steady. And then, in one impossible, heart-shattering moment, Ethan began to push Chad's hand backward. An inch, a breath. No more. But enough. Enough to shift the world. Enough to make Chad's eyes go wide with panic. The whistle never came. Because the match wasn't over. Because the real fight was still happening. Inside Ethan. Inside Chad. Inside everyone watching who had ever wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was more inside them too. And then, Chad, with a roar of frustration, ripped his hand free and slammed his palm down onto the table. Disqualified. Gasps erupted, confusion, shouts. The referee blew his whistle furiously, trying to restore order. Chad stormed off, shoving through the crowd, face red with rage. And Ethan, stunned, shaking, victorious not by strength but by endurance, stood alone at the table. The trophy was placed into his hands, heavy, solid, real. The crowd roared, not because he was perfect, not because he was invincible, because he had stayed, because he had fought, because he had refused to be less than everything he could be. Ethan lifted the trophy high, and for the first time, he wasn't holding onto it like a shield. He was holding it like a torch. Victory doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it comes with silence. Ethan Parker stood in the center of the fairground, the weight of the trophy in his hands, the roar of the crowd still vibrating in his bones. He should have felt like a king, but all he felt was still, solid, present. The faces around him blurred together. Friends, strangers, skeptics. Chad was gone, swallowed by the night. The teachers and parents who had once doubted now clapped politely, some even offering congratulatory smiles. But Ethan barely noticed, because for the first time, their opinions, good or bad, didn't matter. The fight wasn't for them. It never had been. It was for him. Stallone approached, weaving through the thinning crowd with easy, grounded steps. No fanfare, no camera crew, just him. He stopped a few feet from Ethan, hands shoved deep into his jeans pockets. "You did good, kid," Stallone said, voice low and rough like gravel under boots. Ethan clutched the trophy tighter, words clogging his throat. "I didn't win the way I thought I would," Ethan managed. Stallone smiled. "You didn't win the way they thought you should either." He leaned closer. "And that's what makes it real." For a long moment, they stood there, a boy and a man, a passing of a torch so quiet no one else even saw it happen. Stallone tapped the bandana wrapped around Ethan's wrist. "You keep that," he said. "Not for luck, not for show, for reminder." Ethan nodded, blinking fast against the sting behind his eyes. A lump sat heavy in his chest. Pride, sorrow, gratitude, all tangled together in a knot he didn't have the words to untie. The night deepened. The fair wound down. Rides slowed and shut off their lights one by one until only the carousel remained, turning slowly, music box notes drifting into the warm, heavy dark. Families gathered their sleepy children. Vendors packed up their booths. Life began to slide back into its normal shape. But Ethan didn't move. He stood there long after the crowds faded, long after the applause died away. Just breathing, just being. Therefore, when the last of the fair workers folded up the ticket booth and the field lay empty and echoing, Ethan finally shifted. He didn't walk home the way he used to, head down, shoulders hunched, trying to disappear. He walked straight, steady, bandana tied tight, trophy swinging at his side. As he crossed the parking lot, he noticed something. Chad's pickup truck. Still parked, still running. Inside, Chad sat slumped behind the wheel, staring out at nothing, a hollow look on his face. No friends, no laughter, no easy swagger, just a kid, lost. Ethan paused. 1,000 feelings warred inside him. Anger, pity, understanding. He could walk away. He owed Chad nothing. But something deeper stirred. Not forgiveness exactly, something harder, or something stronger. Compassion. Therefore, Ethan stepped off the sidewalk and walked up to the truck. He tapped lightly on the window. Chad blinked, startled, rolled it down an inch. "What do you want?" Chad muttered, voice hoarse. Ethan shrugged. "Nothing." Chad stared at him, waiting for mockery, waiting for revenge. It didn't come. Only silence. And then Ethan said very quietly, "See you around." No anger, no challenge. Just a door left open, a bridge not burned, a seed planted in ground most people had already given up on. He turned and walked away. Didn't look back, didn't need to. Because real strength wasn't about who you could beat. It was about who you refused to leave behind, even if they never followed. At home, Ethan set the trophy on his dresser. He untied the red bandana from his wrist and smoothed it flat, laying it across the base like a foundation. And then, carefully, deliberately, he pulled out a blank notebook. He opened it to the first page, and he wrote, "Some kids are born burning. The trick is keeping the fire alive when no one's watching." Outside his window, Millersville slept under a sky thick with stars. Tomorrow, the town would go back to its routines. School, work, games, gossip. Tomorrow, Ethan would go back too. But not as the boy he had been. As the boy who stayed. As the boy who burned. As the boy who learned that you don't have to be seen to matter. You just have to stand. And somewhere in the darkness, a carousel spun slow circles into the night, carrying whispers of battles fought and won. Battles invisible to the world. Battles that mattered anyway. Battles that defined who we are when nobody's looking. He didn't need them to see him. He saw himself. Some kids are born burning. The rare ones, they never let it go out. Thank you so much for watching. Your time means everything to us, and we hope this story moved you as much as it moved us. If it did, please consider leaving a comment, sharing the video, and subscribing to the channel, because powerful stories deserve to be heard. Until next time, stay kind, stay strong, and never underestimate the impact of one small act of courage.